All right, lights. I guess they missed their cue. You've been practicing all day here, and we don't even know what wall to go to. Yeah, good. That's okay. I'll take a little lunch break and get some water here while we're waiting. Can anybody figure out the lights or no? Yeah, we can brighten them up. That's all right, too. There we go. Welcome to West Conshohocken, folks. So listen, this is a greeting card from the turn of last century. Back in the days when they had time, it's a postcard, and people would actually paint them up and draw on them. And it's interesting that the old postcards, you could put to Mary Smith in Freehold, New Jersey, and that's it. And that card would get there, okay? I don't know what happened to the post office since, but they were really sharp back then. So, all right, let's get what we need here.
It's a little bit off the screen.
Let's straighten up. That's right. Okay. All right, here we go. This is the home of Peter Madsen. Peter Madsen's house was located on the West Conshohocken side of the river, approximately right under where the new bridge is today. Peter Madsen in the 1700s, him and his sons built a ford across the river. A ford is a rock dam with wooden planks on top of it so that wagons could cross. And what Madsen did is you had to pay a fee if you wanted to cross his ford because he owned the property on both sides of the river. So anybody wanting to cross on his ford, you paid a fee. Otherwise, you could swim. So that's kind of the way it went. This house was knocked down in 1921 because it was right under where the new bridge was being constructed at the time. So here we go. Not wrong button there. Right button here. Okay. I want to start with the covered bridge from West Conshohocken looking towards Conshohocken. You're standing up around where McDonald's is, somewhere in that place. You can see the covered bridge crossing the Schuylkill. The covered bridge was a very short bridge. It went from bank to bank. That was it. When you came out of that bridge, you went through another covered bridge, which was over the canal. And also the toll house sat right here on the end of the bridge. You had to pay a hefty toll to cross that bridge. Now, it was like 1 cent for a person, 3 cents if you were carrying a cow across, 5 cents for a herd of sheep. If you were going to school or a funeral, it was free, so on and so forth. The county didn't take over the bridge until sometime in the early 1900s, like 1916, 17, when the Iron Bridge was there. They took over and made it a free bridge. Looking from the Conshohocken side, you can see going down Fayette Street into the covered bridge. You crossed the one bridge to get over the canal, and then you took the covered bridge into West Conshohocken. You can see West Conshohocken at the time was pretty vacant there. This picture was taken in 1866. This was John Pugh's feed store right here. John Pugh lived at the corner of 5th Avenue and Fayette Street in Conshohocken. He was a Civil War veteran responsible for coming up with numerous statues and commemorative stones honoring the Pennsylvania heroes in the Civil War. So, after they took down the covered bridge in late 1866, and they went to an iron bridge that you can see here crossing the river. The interesting thing here is you can see the canal coming into Conshohocken, the dam at West Conshohocken, and you see this little ripple here in the river. That's where the original ford was, where that ripple is there, okay? When the tide gets really, really low, you can still see that ripple in the water there. So they started on the concrete bridge in 1919. They took the iron bridge down, and you can see the concrete pillars being constructed. You see scaffolding out on the river. And this was a wooden temporary bridge crossing the two boroughs. It was a one-lane bridge. You can see the car on the bridge. But if you pulled up and a car was crossing, you had to wait for it to get to the other side before you could go, because it was only one lane. So pretty interesting way. It took them 2 years to build that bridge. I'll give you some shots of it under construction. You see the bridge under construction there looking towards West Conshohocken, of course. You can see the other side of the bridge when they were preparing. This would have been McLaughlin's drugstore. They had a number of stores in here, everything from a paper store to a barber shop. I only know it as Bozo's hot dog store. At the end, when they demolished it, had a big Bozo's on the wall, and But you can see him preparing for the new bridge decking there, which was kind of, maybe not. This was just before the bridge opened. You can see the barriers still up on the bridge, early 1921. And so they were preparing to open, but the bridge looked fairly complete there. Again, you're looking down somewhere from McDonald's or in that vicinity. The day they opened the bridge, interesting story, they opened the bridge. The same day, the Rion Theater opened, November 21st, or November 11th, 1921. The bridge officially opened with a large parade from both sides of the bridge. The Rion Theater up on First Avenue was officially opened with a silent film named A Sign on the Door, starring Norma Talone. Interesting, it looks like they had them old-time pavers, you know, that you would see out on the street. Actually, these were 4x4-inch wooden blocks about 12 inches long that they sunk down into the deck of the bridge. And then they coated them with oil to make sure that they would last a long time so that when it rained, the water wouldn't rot the wood out. The problem is, when it rained, it got so slick here, it was like ice. And there was numerous accidents on the bridge because of the oiled up blocks. So they tore the blocks out some months later, and people were warned in the recorder repeatedly, do not take these blocks for your pot stove belly, okay? The firemen were on call every night putting fires out in the chimneys because the oil-soaked logs were lining the chimneys and setting them on fire. So it was quite a mess for about a year until they finally got squared away with what they were doing there. So, okay, this is the dedication of the monument in West Conshohocken in 1923. If I'm not mistaken, Mrs. DeHaven, who lost her son John DeHaven in the war, unveiled the monument. You're looking down Front Street, and I'll give you another shot of that. People gathered around, came out, looking across the bridge. It was kind of a dank day that day, and but they were happy to have their monument. We'll get back to that monument a little later. A couple quick shots here just from the bridge, looking into West Conshohocken. You can see these houses. These houses we'll talk about a little later. They were demolished in 1950 to make way for the ramps to the Schuylkill Expressway. So, nice crowd of people on hand. I believe that might have been when the monument was breaking up or something. Same picture, just from the other side. You can kind of see the monument here and the houses here that come out. And again, McLaughlin's drugstore that was here. Interesting place. Looking down Front Street, probably the 1930s. And I have to tell you, you can see the monument, and I'm pretty sure this was taken at rush hour, because 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 cars, at least 5 cars in the shot, and it got pretty busy there. So you can see Davis's coal yard in the background, later became Gleba's supplies, and we'll get back to that a little later. I was on the river when the bridge blew up. 1985, they had to blow this bridge up to build the new bridge. Part of the dilemma was the bridge was dilapidated with huge holes, and nobody wanted to build in either side, Conshohocken or West Conshohocken, with the ratty old bridge with holes in it. The developers were against building because of the bridge, the condition of the bridge. So thanks to the efforts of Jerry McTammany and Conshohocken Council, and along with West Conshohocken Council, they worked hard with state officials to get an approval, an immediate reconstruction of the bridge. So they had to blow this thing up, and the two things about it was they wanted to keep these main pillars to put the new bridge on. If they couldn't keep them main pillars, it would cost them millions upon millions of dollars to redo and set the project back about 2-3 years. So the problem was when they blew it up, they had to make sure that this disconnected and this disconnected and this at the exact same microsecond, because if you disconnected one side, the weight of that arch would have pulled this out of the river and therefore causing a problem. These arches were like 4 feet high, 6 feet wide, weighed tons and tons. Side story I'm going to give you on that is I was going down to photograph the explosion of the bridge. Okay. You can see the start. You can see the start of the explosion right here when it first blew. And my wife, Donna, God bless her, she asked me, where are you going to be when the bridge blows up? I said, I'm going to be upriver by the dam. And she says, you're going to be out in the river? And I said, yeah, right in the middle. It's not very deep. It's only about knee high out in the middle of that river there. Believe me. So anyway, she says, wouldn't you be better off downriver? Because once these pillars collapse into the river, it's going to cause a dam and the water's going to back up. And I basically said in very kind words, look, don't be an ass. The water's going to go over the dam and we're going to be fine. And better yet, I decided to take my 13-year-old son with me, Brian, Butch. I said, Butch, come on out in the river. You're going to take some pictures of the bridge blowing up. So there we stood out in front of that dam, okay? And as the dam came down, and perfect, I mean, they separated it absolutely perfect, okay? You can see it here. It's interesting that the arches are in a million pieces, but they haven't dropped yet. They're still kind of in arch form. And they all come down, and it causes this dam across the river. And we were standing in knee-high water within minutes. I was up to my chest. And I'm fighting to get Butch out of the river, and we look like them people in Vietnam with our hands high above our head with all the camera equipment, like wading through the water. I never said a word to her for about 5 years. Wouldn't tell her because I didn't want to hear it. Well, she happened to come into a slideshow and I started to explain it, and she caught on 5 years later about what happened at the explosion of the river. So anyway, I felt the heat then. So anyway, looking at West Country, I love the shot because they hadn't opened the new bridge yet in 1987. But again, West Conshohocken was quite the view. We called it the 100-mile mountains because it seemed like it went on for 100 miles. I'll give you a few more shots of looking towards West Country and just how beautiful the view was from Conshohocken from time to time. You can see it here in the 1950s. This would have been the Rion Theater here, okay? Flacco store here. Coll's Custom Framing 3 blocks up. I just wanted to get that plug in, you know. So that's a good shot from the 1950s and so on. And this is kind of what it looks like today, okay? It's still the same, but, you know, the towers take something away from the view there, if you would. So anyway, moving forward, your little nighttime shot there. You can see the Marriott building that we're sitting in right now. You can see Donald Polwarth's one-tower bridge there and so on and so forth. So that's a good evening time shot, okay? And once again, I took this shot, I think, in 1982. Conshohocken was very bare and very desolate. We had 25 acres of nothing except for the Conshohocken firehouse, the washies. But it was barren. And like I said, nobody wanted to build due to the bridge. And then finally, in 1984, we got our first bridge, our first building at First Avenue, and that was the start of everything. Ray Wyman came in, gave a great proposal, and built his building at First Avenue. In West Conshohocken, Isabel Tyson was a secretary for nearly a quarter of a century. In 1952, she cut the ribbon to open up the ramps to the Schuylkill Expressway. And I don't want to necessarily talk about the expressway at the moment. I do want to talk about Isabel Tyson. She was probably one of the most leading ladies that West Conshohocken has ever seen or ever had. She was a secretary there for about 25 years. She had all kinds of awards, not only from the state of Pennsylvania, where she traveled to Harrisburg a few times to receive it, but also federal awards because she did time sort of in the military and with the bonds and all that stuff. She was a very special woman, very smart, very well educated. She did an interview back in the 1960s where the interviewee asked her, do you think there will ever be a female president? And her response was, absolutely. It might take us 50 years, but you're going to see a woman serving as president. And I was kind of pulling for Hillary at the time, thinking about her, because I'm thinking, how ironic is that she'd be bold enough to even think that there'd be a female president in this country, and yet she did. So she was the ribbon cutter for the ramps to the Schuylkill Expressway, the official opening. Now, when the ramps opened, it was kind of cool because they weren't expecting much traffic. And again, this was probably rush hour coming off the bridge, jumping onto the ramps to the Schuylkill there, you know, and off they went. However, this was the beginning of the end for the West Conshohocken as we knew it, because it cut that town in half. And somehow it was a real lousy deal for the residents. So as we moved on, you can see parts of West Conshohocken in the background with the Schuylkill running through West Country. You can see all the cars there. There's 1, 2, and 3. So they were using the road, but you're seeing West Country in the background. I'll give you another shot of that same deal, with West Country in the background. And these shots are from 1954, so expressway was moving along. The problem that eventually erupted, though, is that this road turned into this road, okay? And then this road turned into these roads. And it just didn't stop. And when you talk about cutting the town in half and diluting the population, taking the homes from people, and the heartache of losing your home to redevelopment, it was just kind of miserable for these people. So, and eventually, it just goes and goes and goes. You can cross that bridge in Conshohocken, get on the Blue Road, okay? You won't hit another red light till you get to Reading. Okay. My wife and I went to Akron, Ohio. When we crossed that bridge, we didn't see another traffic light till we were in Ohio, because the Blue Road took us to the Turnpike, and the Turnpike took us to Ohio, and not until we got off in Akron did we see another red light. That's what them highways do for us. So, now people complain about the traffic, all these buildings. My God, the traffic, the traffic. Okay, this picture was taken, I believe, in the early 1970s, before any buildings were there. I have pictures from the 60s, 70s, 80s, just like this. This was the traffic on the bridge back then, and actually, it's pretty much the traffic that we get now at rush hour. So it's not like the buildings killed us, but yeah, they brought traffic, but the traffic has always been there. We should clear that little thing up right there. Let's look at Crawford Road here. I mean, Crawford Road kind of quiet here, but it was also kind of quiet here back in the day. So, you're going up and you're making your little right-hand turn towards Four Falls, or you cross the bridge to go to Four Falls. But that was Crawford Avenue. I'm guessing back in the 30s by the looks of that car. I'm not sure of the year. Okay. This is the gas plant on Steel Plant Road, or on River Road, I'm sorry, in West Conshohocken. Back when they built this thing in 1919, this was River Road. This was River Road when they started building that gas. Dirt roads that weren't quite there yet. I'll give you a few more quick shots of that. Again, River Road leaving town, heading towards Sweden. It was dirt road. And I have all kinds of pictures of them building that plant. Pretty interesting. Outside the gas plant, you didn't want to travel through there in the wintertime. It would have been a little hard for you. And again, one more shot looking down River Road. I always thought these were kind of unique pictures, rarely seen photographs, but they tell a good story back in the day. So, listen, most of the West Conshohocken residents, they made their living at the mills. And I thought I'd give you just a quick shot of River Road. Not necessarily back in the day, but after the factories had kind of moved out of town. But these buildings sat along River Road for many, many years, and we would drive past them, and all I could ever think about was the jobs lost, okay, along River Road when these buildings were all flourishing very, very well. But we did have, West Conshohocken had the woolen mills, where Conshohocken was mainly responsible for the steel mills. West Conshohocken was responsible for the woolen mills. And it was George Bullock who started all that. George Bullock was known as the founding father of West Conshohocken. He was their first mayor and stayed Burgess up until 1884 till he gave it up. And but he helped put the town on the map, incorporate it, and steer it in the right direction. So the thing about Bullock, I want to tell you that this was his house. His house sat above the industries, where you go along Ballygomingo Road, you see these mills along there. Up on the hill, there's now a landscaping firm. Well, that's where Bullock's mansion was, up on the hill. The story with his mansion was, it started in Conshohocken, where when St. Mary's Parish formed in 1905, they also by 1906 started an orphanage for wayward kids without parents. So St. Mary's in Conshohocken started this orphanage called St. Mary's Orphanage. By 1911, the orphanage moved to Bullock's estate over in West Conshohocken, where it served as an orphanage from 1911 to 1936. That's St. Mary's Church, where the orphanage started in Conshohocken, the old church, and then it moved over. The orphanage would dress the kids up every Sunday, put them on display to see if there was going to be anybody adopting them kids as time went, and so on and so forth. How you doing, man? And I have a few shots here of the orphanage. These were more or less publicity photos showing how good these little boys were, how well they dressed, and so on and so forth. Okay? So, and in front of their beds, of course. Now, St. Mary's eventually moved to Ambler. Okay? St. Mary's Villa moved in 1936, and they moved into a mansion that was an asbestos king, if you would, out in Ambler. Okay? So this was St. Mary's Orphanage out in Ambler. Some years later, Hollywood came calling, where they decided to do a movie called The Trouble with Angels. And it was based at St. Mary's Villa in Ambler. The Trouble with Angels, of course, starred Haley Mills, and everybody knows the other one, right? Rosalind Russell also starred with her. And to think that it all started in Conshohocken, West Conshohocken, or at least I like to put that together in my mind, like, how about that? That movie came from an orphanage that started in our community. So this was one of the greater events I covered as a photographer for the Herald or Recorder, one of them. For some reason, the Borough Council, I believe back in the early 1990s, decided that it was a good idea to fire Chief of Police Joe Claiborne. So they said, well, he's no longer our chief. So needless to say, that kind of stirred up some bad blood in the borough. And the next council meeting, these picketers all showed up. The crowd was outside Borough Hall. You couldn't fit them. People across the street were on the porches and hanging out the windows. It was a massive scene, okay, of these people protesting the fact that Joe Claiborne was fired. Now, I was amused by this, okay? With all this seriousness going on and debating, and council trying to plead their case why they fired Joe, you got this dog walking around inside the Borough Hall, and I'm thinking, it looks like the South or something where, you know, dogs just wander into the meetings, and well, nobody says anything, nobody questions it, nobody says whose dog. And throughout the meeting, this dog wanders around in and out of the tables and chairs at council, and they're trying to be serious going about their meeting. One of my favorites here, you see Pat Barr here, she don't even want to look, right? And I don't know if it was at the end of the meeting or thereafter, but the council then decided that it might be a really good idea if we put Joe Claiborne back as chief, and we might get a few more votes come election time. So Joe wound up back as chief of police. So, but that was one of the assignments I got that I really didn't pay much attention to the meeting because I was just following that dog around the meeting there. Nobody giving a damn about it, you know. So, all right, George Clay, they held their very first Christmas party in 1950. Now, I call it the Santa creepy mask syndrome. You used to get by the Santa uniform and you get a mask, so you looked like Santa Claus. Now, how these kids didn't have nightmares when they got home, I don't know, but it was in 1950. I have the names of these two people. They're slipped my mind at the moment. But it was in 1950, and it was a big event, and I can show you some other photos here at the George Clay Fire Company. Now, I'm looking at all these kids in the picture, all excited. Now, these kids, a lot of them are your parents or your grandparents, so you might want to find them in the crowd when they were 10 years old and loved hanging out with creepy Santa. So I'll give you one more shot here, and you know, I don't know if these kids were excited or just freaked out. You know, so, I know which side of the road I'd have been on, but anyway, moving on. A very popular mayor today, George Barr. It seems to me, I knew George, and it seemed to me that like every mayor behind him had to measure up. George was a measuring stick for mayors who was very active in the community, provided a lot of programs and kept things going. And he didn't have the money to deal with that they have today. In other words, you know, they wanted to put on programs and have the mayor do different things, and they didn't have a dime to spend, you know, and yet somehow Mayor Barr negotiated through all of that and so on. Here you see him involved with the West Conshohocken Raiders, if you would, you know. So, but he was quite an active mayor, and he was a great guy. He was a member of the famed Battery C that marched out of Conshohocken in 1940, and they never came home until 1946. That's a whole other 2.5-hour program, so we'll pass that by. Mackenzie Park was a very active place. And for those of you that don't know or aren't aware, Mackenzie Park started on the other side of town when they got a donation of property from a fellow by the name of Keith Mackenzie. So this is where the name Mackenzie Park comes from. And over the years there was some recommendations that maybe we change the name of the park or something. And yet I'm in favor of honoring the individual who donated the original land and kept his name on the park, which is something you should do. Now, Chief Slater. I'll say this about Chief Slater. I got two things to say about him. Number one is he was probably the most active chief of police that West Conshohocken's ever had. He was more involved with kids' programs than any chief of police I've known anywhere. He held the punt, pass, and kick contest up at the A field every year to give children an opportunity to participate in programs that they otherwise would not have had. He had the home run derby every year. He would take kids to Connie Mack Stadium and he'd get them on the field to meet ball players, and he'd have athletes come to Conshohocken. And I always thought the world of Chief Slater. The other side of Chief Slater was, the other side of Chief Slater was, if he got a hold of a juvenile that was breaking windows or something, he would typically give him a good kick in the ass and send him home before he took him to the police station. And he was just that kind of a guy. So here he is here posing with some other children at another program, and so on and so forth. So I always respected him. As far as the kids in the picture, all hoodlums. That's all I can say about it. So I know them West Conshohocken kids, you know, so. Sometimes I would drive around town and run into people here, and found these guys bumming around on the porch. They put their beard down long enough to let me take a picture, okay? And guys, I got to tell you something, you know, for all the guys, you know, the women of Conshohocken love me. I was a favorite over there. They loved me to death, and you know, you can tell by some of the pictures I took of them over the years. I mean, here's the late Pat Kelly and Lorraine, and just to show their love, they always pump, you know what I mean? They love me. You know, they pumped that love into me, and I always appreciated it, you know. And Jackie, I love you, baby, and she gave me the love right back. Big smile. Well, maybe not in this picture, but you know, they all, I'm telling you guys, they love me, okay? It was just unbelievable. And if that, you know, one time I'm leaving Mackenzie Park, and I said goodbye to the firemen, goodbye to the police, and I showed the policeman a little love there. And next thing I know, I'm getting slammed up against the police car because I was giving them the international love sign there, and they didn't appreciate it for some reason, you know. And so anyway, listen, even my own daughter, I got to tell you, that's my daughter. She loves me to death. And I love, my wife can't look at it. She, for whatever reason. So now, I got a lot to say about this picture, but I'll just say this. These are people we count on as firemen and ambulance to come save us when we're in trouble. And I take these kinds of pictures and I question if this is the group that I want coming to save my life. You know what I mean? This was some kind of a prom or night out for them, and they dressed up for the occasion. So, you know, so. Again, going back to Mackenzie Park, one of the most popular things about summertime parks in Conshohocken, West Conshohocken, was doll. They'd have a doll show every year, and I believe this picture was taken in 1953, and you might recognize a few people in that picture. I have all their names, I just don't have them in my head. So here's a picture. We got Joe Claiborne and company here, and I can speak on behalf of Joe Claiborne. He had to be one of the nicest guys I ever met in my life. He was very low-keyed, very low-tempered, you know, and would help you out any way he could. And this was back in the days when they were a little younger, played a little softball in different leagues and whatnot. I would attend many parades in West Conshohocken over the years, and you'll see some people here. This is Pat Kelly doing it up here. I don't know what she was posing as, but I guess she was pretty happy about it. So the first ounce of, I don't want to say respectability, but the first thing that happened to West Conshohocken that said we could be somebody, and they started to draw people from outside the borough, was when former Philadelphia 76 players and coach Billy Cunningham decided to open up his bar in West Conshohocken. And all of a sudden, people took notice to West Conshohocken, like, Billy has a bar in West Conshohocken, you know. It was a big deal. And all of a sudden, people started showing up, and I wandered in one night, and they had Raleigh Mass. Hold on, we dropped the mic. Andrew, help me out here.
Oh, you dropped your mic?
Dropped the mic, knocked it right off.
Whoop. Here, we'll clip you up again.
Hook me up, brother.
There you go.
Thank you. Andrew Kibe Productions. Thank you very much. So, wandered in one night, Raleigh Massimino, who was just coming off the, of course, the Villanova championships, and the fellow next to him was a fellow many of us listened to for a long time. His name was Buck the Bartender, and he would be on the radio and television talking sports. But these kinds of people would show up at Billy C's, and all of a sudden, Billy C's got popular. You see these row homes on Front Street in West Conshohocken. I'll give you a quick story to these homes, okay? People drive by them every day. Some people think, hey, low income or just old row homes. Okay, over in West Conshohocken, on the border of West Conshohocken and Lower Merion, was a camp called Camp Discharge. And it was a camp right after the Civil War, where Civil War veterans, if you would, they would go to Camp Discharge, and they would muster out of the service, and they would collect their final paycheck. They had a hospital set up there, a big hospital, anybody needing treatment or anything of that nature. They had rooms up there, a ton of rooms where the old soldiers, they could sleep or stay there for months at a time if they had to. And they had all kinds of buildings to service them, you know, where they provided them with money and train money. And these soldiers, they would wander down into town on a Friday and Saturday night to both West Conshohocken and Conshohocken, and they would paint up the town. You know, they'd go into our drinking establishments, our fine drinking establishments, and they would load up on some booze, and they would get their asses kicked and head back to camp. So when the camp closed down in 1865, everybody, when the war was over, they mustered down, they had all these buildings up there, okay? George Bullock went up, and he bought half the camp. And he came down and he used all that lumber to build these houses. Both sets that you see along Front Street, he used that lumber from Camp Discharge to build these houses. The fellow that bought the other half of the camp was a guy by the name of Samuel Fulton. And Fulton had the Fulton Industries, Fulton Foundries over in Plymouth Township. And he took the rest of that lumber and built row homes on now called Fulton Street, right behind Elm Street. That lumber for all them houses was also from Camp Discharge. So they kind of have a history to them. The lumber there is from the 1860s. They came from Camp Discharge, and the people living there probably have no idea of what they're living in. But I always thought it was kind of cool, and I always appreciated them homes driving by. So I can talk about West Conshohocken servicemen, the sacrifices they made. That's another 3-hour talk for me. Someday we'll have that talk. But World War I, we can talk about John DeHaven and a number of others. He was the absolutely youngest military personnel to give his life during World War I. He entered the war when he was 15 years old. He worked for a fellow by the name of Leary and Leary's Groceries in Conshohocken. And him and another fellow that worked across the street, they decided, they had a pact. At 10 o'clock that morning, they were walking off the job, going down, getting on a train, and they were heading into Philadelphia to enlist in the Marines, which they did. The only thing is, John DeHaven was 15 years old. The fellow that he went with was 16 years old. Just days after DeHaven's birthday, where he turned 16 years old, he was killed in Borough, France. He was in a foxhole, he got shot up, and he died, okay? And what West Conshohocken, therefore, is responsible for offering up the youngest serviceman to die during World War I. World War II, I can't say enough about World War II. In Conshohocken, 1 out of every 7 residents that lived in the borough, including men, women, and children, 1 out of every 7 served in the military during World War II. In West Conshohocken, 1 out of every 6 residents served in the military during World War II. And they had a lot of sacrifices during World War II. In Vietnam, a couple of our favorite sons were taken, and it's something that burned in me because I was in high school when that happened, and it stung me hard, and it wasn't until a shooting by our government at Kent State University that I really grew up and really got angry at the war, but certainly the lives taken from West Conshohocken always stuck with me. So West Conshohocken has paid their dues. Back to the monument. The monument was erected in 1923. However, the materials weren't that great that they used for the monument because it was kind of a wartime when they were putting this thing together, and they just didn't come up with the best materials to build that monument. I'll give you a couple different views of the monument. One is kind of looking off the bridge. This would be where the houses were taken down for the expressway ramps. You're coming off the bridge here, and you could bear to the left or bear to the right, but these were the houses taken down. McDonald's sits up in here to give you a bearing, so you could cross a little bridge there and so on and so forth. Another little view here coming off the bridge. Now the last two pictures that you saw, and the picture of Front Street, you all got tickets when you came in. If you didn't get a ticket, get a ticket in. We have 4 photographs we're giving away today at the end of this program. Okay? 3 of them pictures are here. The 4th photograph, we're going to pull a 4th ticket. But that 4th person is going to have to come over to the store on Fayette Street to pick that picture up after Wednesday, because that picture did not arrive in time. But these pictures are being given away to a ticket holder today, no charge. It's just a raffle. And I think they're great pictures to have. This here, would have been McLaughlin's drugstore. It opened as a drugstore, and then it became a bar. And then Prohibition shut it down. I'm not saying they didn't serve drinks during Prohibition. Okay? But I can tell you this. Ford Street, during Prohibition, was a circus. On a Saturday night, they had more visitors to West Conshohocken than Disneyland ever had on a Saturday night. Okay? They were drinking it up, and I'm pretty sure some of it came from McLaughlin's, okay? Currently Jasper's, I think, or it has a new name now, West Side, something. So, moving on, there's the picture of McLaughlin's. Also the site, right in this intersection, in 1931, there was a horrendous gas explosion, okay? Utility companies had a big hole in the road they were working, and they hit a gas main, and the explosion came, tossing cement halfway across the bridge. 1 man was killed. A Times Herald paper delivery truck took a few people to the hospital due to the explosion, and that was the explosion long before the Front Street explosion happened. Inside McLaughlin's drugstore, just to give you a view of what it looked like inside, during Prohibition, they had a nice little soda fountain in there, a nice little drugstore. Again, that's Mr. McLaughlin down at the end of the bar, so on and so forth. We'll move on to Davis's lumber yard. I think 3/4 of the buildings in both boroughs came from lumber from Davis's and from Jones's lumber yards, both one in Conshohocken, one in... Bill Davis was an amazing guy. He served on many boards, including bank boards and so on and so forth. And he just belonged to so many communities and did so much for the town. He was an amazing guy. See one of his old vehicles here once the motorized vehicles came. He would give customers credit back in the day. If you didn't have money for coal to heat your house, of course he would spot you the coal and collect that money later and so on and so forth. So it was really a blessing. It later became Kibe Brothers. Kibe Brothers provided construction people from all over Montgomery County with needed materials. They were a staple for many, many years. And again, Kibe's never failed to get involved in the community of West Conshohocken. I want to take a 30-second break with Kibe's here so I can take a sip of water. I'm like the comedians on stage that stop for that drink, you know. Where's my clicker at? Clicker is here. Nope. Got a light here for me. Somewhere I lost my clicker. Stay with me. Okay, we got it. We're good. Good to go. All right, moving on here. That's the other photo we showed earlier. We're going to raffle one of them off at the end of the show as well. They're nice 11 by 14s. Again, you can see the cars that were moving along there. I'm guessing the Galibas weren't that old at that point, so it must have still been Davis's place. So, well, I know there's a couple of Galibas in the house looking pretty old tonight to me. So I move on. Same view today. You might want to see it. Now, this view, of course, was taken during rush hour. I took this view on Sunday morning where I wouldn't get hit by a car, so traffic was kind of light. And they will run you over at that intersection there. So, okay, now this is a story here I got to tell, and I love this story. Now, when I say West Conshohocken was a gritty town, I mean they were a damn gritty town. Back in the 1930s and early 1940s, they twice had a problem with the water company. Council complained to the water company that there was no water pressure at the top of the hill, and that the firemen couldn't get enough water out of the fire hydrants to put out a fire if we had a fire. And the water company just baited them along and said, well, we'll see what we can do, we'll see what we can do. So Borough Council made a decision, we ain't paying no water bill. And they encouraged residents, don't pay your water bill, okay? If they can't give us water pressure, we're not paying them. And they didn't. And eventually the water company came around and they had better pressure at the top of the hill. Now that happened twice, once in the 30s, once in the 40s. In 1977, West Conshohocken, like Conshohocken, was a poor town. They didn't have money. They didn't have money for programs. They didn't have money to pay their bills, okay? So they were paying this electric bill for the lights for this intersection. And they said, hey, they're not our lights. The state put them traffic lights in. That's their bill. We're not paying them. And the state said, BS. You're responsible for the upkeep of the lamps, and you're responsible to pay that electric bill. And West Conshohocken Borough Council at the time said, this is your road, and they're your lights, and we're not paying the bill. And the state said, well, you're going to have to pay the bill. Now, if you look closely, they're all covered up. West Conshohocken said, cut the power. And they did. And they put a stop sign. There's one stop sign in the middle of the intersection out there behind the car. Stop. And that was it. And that's the way that intersection sat for weeks in 1977. Well, the Chamber of Commerce from Conshohocken got involved, and that expanded to the Montgomery County Chamber of Commerce. And then eventually the Philadelphia Chamber of Commerce got involved with Thatcher Longstretch as being the head spokesperson. And then it went to Harrisburg about who was going to pay the bill for the lights. And Conshohocken basically said, look, you can charge us all you want. We ain't got no money. So they offered to pay half the bill. And West Conshohocken said, I don't think we're speaking the same language. We don't have any money. Not for half, not for a quarter. We ain't paying that bill. Leave the lights wrapped up. We're fine with that. And that's what they did. And eventually, the state and the county came around and said, listen, unwrap the lights and we're going to pay the bill for you. And they said, that's fine with us. So eventually they got squared away. Now, can you imagine going through that intersection today with a lone stop sign? Think about that, okay? So, council has the power, baby. Think about it. But they were looking out for the residents, okay? That's for sure. Four Falls, what a beautiful area that was. Four Falls, just up the way there off Crawford Road. And in the summertime, Four Falls, it was a regular little lake up top, and then there was 4 individual falls there, and people would come and picnic on Sundays. They'd come out in their Sunday best, and all the families would get together, and you'd spend half to 3/4 of the day there at Four Falls, refreshing. You could dip your feet in the water there and everything. Okay. In the wintertime, it was just kind of a scenic thing where people would go just to check out the ice and see the little lake up top that was frozen over. And for those of you that are interested, seriously, you can still see Four Falls today. You might want to take your blanket, have a little picnic. It's right up there on the side of the parking lot, okay? You can see the Four Falls. It comes down. I think there's 4 little sections that drop down. And but feel free. They got a little grassy knoll there. You can spread your blanket and enjoy the day up there, okay? Maybe I'll see you up there, all right? Senator John Kennedy came to town. Came to West Conshohocken, I believe it was 1960, on his way to a presidential debate with Richard Nixon. He stopped briefly in West Conshohocken on a drizzly day. He had some remarks from the residents that showed up. This was the only picture, it was a recorder picture, the only picture I could ever come up with of John Kennedy in West Conshohocken. If anybody knows anybody, or perhaps had a camera with him that day and took some other pictures, geez, I would love to see him and get copies just for the archives, but this is the only existing picture that I know of Kennedy stopped in West, and he was very cordial, took some time and chatted with some folks, and then on to Bridgeport, Sweetsburg, Bridgeport, and eventually he wound up in Norristown, where he spoke in front of a packed house before staying in Norristown overnight at the Montgomery Hotel, and heading on to a debate with Richard Nixon, and I believe just a few short weeks later, he became President of the United States. Just an old-fashioned look down Ford Street here. You can see, of course, the Borough Hall, and back when the Bozo building was it Bozo or Bonzo's? I forget. I call it Bozo's building here before they demolished it. It was just a chummy little street, and so. Of course, this is coming off the bridge, and this is where we sit today. This is the location of the Marriott Hotel, folks. It was a blacksmith shop, sat in here for many, many years. Later turned into a garage, and then eventually the Marriott came along. And two things about the Marriott. Number one, when they were building it, they had a big crane topple over, and it was fortunate that nobody was killed. I don't know if you remember the crane toppling over. And then I think a few weeks later, they had a halt construction on the Marriott. They said it was sinking on the one side, leaning towards the river, and they were a little concerned that if it kept sinking, that the building could wind up in the river. So they hauled it up, and they eventually said, yeah, we jacked up the building and put some shims under there, and it's all level now. I've often thought about whether I should really ever visit here or not, and because if you do, you're okay to stay on the lower floors, because if it falls over, you won't wind up in the river, but the upper floors will be swimming, and depending on the time of year, I don't know if I'd like that very much. I'm going to start with this little segment with the Park House. This is the Mary Wood Park House, and Allen Wood Jr. built this in 1869 for his bride-to-be Mary Wood, Mary Yerkes Wood. So they lived there for a couple of years, and Allen Wood Jr., being a Wood, had a few dollars, and decided, no, he wanted to live in a castle. So by 1900, he had a castle built, okay, up on the hill over Conshohocken, that we would come to know as Father Divine's. But Allen Wood built this for him and his wife. They didn't have any children. So they moved into the castle, and they had over 100 servants, between the gardeners and the cooks and the this. But they had over 100 servants taking care of them up there. Life was good. He died just 2 years later. In 1902, Allen Wood passes away. Well, his wife Mary couldn't stand the place, and she made a beeline back to Conshohocken, back to the Park House, where she lived out her life. The castle eventually gets sold to a pharmaceutical company, who in early 1960s sold it to Father Divine, who was a worldwide known preacher. And it was very controversial at the time, because he was of African-American descent, and he married a white woman from Canada. Okay, so Father Divine died, passed away some years later, but it's a very interesting place. You can go up there on Sundays in the summertime, and you can get a tour of Allen Wood's castle, okay, or Father Divine's castle, however you choose to look at it. They have some rules up there, though, when you go up, okay? Females must wear skirts or dresses, no pants. Males have to wear long pants. No undue mixing of the sexes. You can't hold hands. If you're seen kissing, you'll be asked to leave, so on and so forth, okay? But you can tour the place, and it's a great place to tour. I'll give you a few shots of the inside here. I've been there many times. This is you walk into the front room there when you walk in. Mother Divine was a good friend of mine. Visited with her many times. She's been to my store. She's been to Conshohocken on many occasions, and she passed away a few years ago. Throughout the years, they would have guests over and members of staff, and they'd have these large dinners every night. And at the head of the table, it was always vacant with a plate of food, for Father Divine. They believed that he was still with them, so therefore they would set a plate for him every night, put food on the plate in case he cared to join them. So one of them freakish things about the Father Divine following. So how about Frank Allen's gas station? I don't know that many of you remember that, up on a hill. This is the current site of Wawa, and this was Frank Allen's gas station. Frank Allen was quite an athlete back in his day, went to Country High, and eventually had his gas station up on the hill. At one time, if I'm not mistaken, I read, and I have other pictures of this, where he has a ton of gas pumps. He sold 26 different types of gasoline at his station. I don't know why you needed 26 different brands, but if you did, Frank had them, okay? So, going back to what I call the famous bank robbery in West Conshohocken in 1927, the bank was robbed, back when this was a bank. And they said, or they faulted, members of the Bandana Gang from South Philadelphia came in and robbed them, okay? Now this fella, I forget his name, I knew his ancestors on 8th Avenue. He was the lone bank teller in the bank at the time. It wasn't uncommon to open a bank and just have one person in there who would go behind the bars and then hand out money. He was the only employee at the time that was robbed. It took them well over a year to round up the Bandana Gang, but eventually they got him and put him back in business. So no harm, no foul, but they did manage to get away with some people's monies. That brings me to a topic that I avoided for years. You're looking at a partial area of West Conshohocken, and in here you can see the woolen mills back here, but you can see the Front Street homes that were lost to a fire on January 27th, 1971. I avoided anything about the fire in my slideshows for years because it's kind of a downer. You know, I had to talk about things that weren't so pleasant, and I figured I was better off just leaving it out of the show because we're here to have a nice time. But on the other hand, tonight, it is part of the history woven into the borough of West Conshohocken. Now, if you're thinking about being a fireman, I heard a nice little tale being told how they need firemen, and they always do need firemen. Firemen are a different breed of people. Average person can't be a fireman, okay? Because on the night of that fire, this is what a fireman ran into. These fire trucks arrived, these firemen jumped off the back of the truck and they ran towards the fire, thinking that there were lives to be saved, and there were. But they ran into the fire. Think about that. I don't know, I would just have to say it takes a very special person to go into that fire thinking that something's going to be saved there. And they ran, that fire spread wider and higher than you can imagine, okay? And in the end, one fireman was killed, Joe Powers. 8 residents were killed. Another, and my numbers might be off here, sorry, I don't have them from, but perhaps another 35 residents taken to area hospitals that night in ambulances. A good friend of mine, Frances McEwen, who was a writer for the Evening Bulletin at the time, was at the fire. And she said what she remembered most was the parade of ambulances running back and forth across the Matson Ford Bridge. It went on all night, just hauling bodies to 3 different hospitals. And the sirens never stopped on the bridge. They were either coming or going with bodies. And that's the part that I always remembered and the thing that always haunted me, the ambulances going back and forth. The following morning when daylight came, firemen worked through the night. It looked like a war zone, something you see on TV. Up front, there is a collage of pictures from that fire. They're rarely seen photographs that I've had stored away. And I managed to put them on a collage, and today Cole's Custom Framing is donating that to the George Clay Fire Company, hoping they will find a place to hang that. I don't take kindly to applause over this event, but I appreciate it. But hopefully they'll find an area to hang that in their firehouse as a reminder. These firemen worked through the night in sub-zero temperatures. In case you didn't notice the ice hanging all over everything, it was sub-zero temperatures, and they were out there trying to find out what went wrong the following morning. Okay, it was an unbelievable scene. I was up on the hill in one of the backyards momentarily during that fire. I was hanging out with a bunch of other kids. I can name them, but don't need to. And we just watched it for about 10 minutes, and you could feel the heat up there. It was kind of a weird thing. And George Clay Fire Company, founded in 1899. A fellow by the name of John Clay showed up in West Conshohocken and said, hey, I'm willing to fund the building of a firehouse and a fire apparatus if you'll simply name it in my brother's name who passed away. His name was George Clay. And members of the West Conshohocken community took him up on his offer. I think John Clay passed away in 1907 or something, but they built that firehouse, they put his name on it. For those of you wondering where the name George Clay came from, that's where it came from. And God bless them, the members of the Clay Company have honored that name for 126 years now, so as they should. That was showing off their first fire apparatus. I have the names of everybody on the back of that truck, but I don't have it in my head. It looked something like this back in 1900 when this picture was taken. It was a great addition to the community, understanding that there was no fire protection in the borough. And let's be honest, the houses were basically tinder boxes. They were made of wood, and they were using potbelly stoves and fireplaces, and they did odd things to keep rooms warm, you know. So there was a lot of fires back then. So George Clay has come through in many, many occasions. This is them out testing the truck, the water pressures and whatnot. This is them in front of their first hand-pulled vehicle. Been a lot of firemen served over the years. As you can see here, dolling it up for a parade. Again, preparing for a parade. Took that picture some years ago. I don't remember exactly what year, but standing proud. And you have to give it to the Ladies Auxiliary because I have been involved with many, many fire companies over the years, whether I was writing them a story or providing a project. I recently wrote the history of the Springville Fire Company's 100-year anniversary. Spent about 6 or 8 months working on that book. And I came to appreciate the Women's Auxiliary years and years ago. The Women's Auxiliary raised money to provide money to the fire company. They get their 15 seconds of glory at a banquet saying, we're presenting a check this year, and everybody applauds and says thank you. But let me just tell you a quick story. I did a history for the Springville Fire Company recently, and back in the day, which was a typical thing, the Ladies Auxiliary decided we're going to have a hoagie sale and raise money for a new truck. So they were in a really good position because they would take orders from the workers at Lee Tires to have the hoagies for them at lunchtime. So they took an order back in 1973, and they took an order for over 200 hoagies for the Lee Tire employees. This is great, man. They're trying to buy a new truck. They were selling the hoagies at $1 a piece, okay? So the day before the hoagie sale, one of the executives show up at the fire company and says, you can't have a hoagie sale and sell hoagies to our employees because they only get 20 minutes for lunch. By the time they come outside to get their hoagie and get it back to the cafeteria, it doesn't give them enough time to eat and get back to their workstation. And they worked on an assembly line, so everybody had to be back. So he said, therefore, you're not permitted to sell hoagies to our employees. So the Ladies Auxiliary were heartbroken. They'd already bought all the materials, if you would, the rolls and the meats and whatnot. So they came up with a great idea. They said, we're going to set up shop at 5 o'clock in the morning across the street on Springville's property from Lee Tires, and we're going to sell hoagies early in the morning in the dark. The firemen will provide lighting, but we'll get the shift coming out of work, and we'll get the shift going into work, and we can sell these hoagies to the employees. And they did. And they sold 300 hoagies at $1 each. And I'm thinking, how much did they spend for the rolls and the meat? And now they're up at 5 o'clock in the morning. What was the profit margin on that job? And this is what Ladies Auxiliaries have done for 100 years, folks. So we really do need to appreciate them if you would. Okay? On and on, everyone, no matter how long or how short they served, and they did it in honor of the fire company that they believed in was saving lives, okay? So, and a few more of the good old boys. And I'll say this, there's probably some guys in that squad that I wouldn't trust with my sister, but when it comes to fighting fires, I wouldn't want anybody else but them right there in that picture. I'll give you that. I've been taking pictures at Clay for a lot of years, and I've enjoyed every minute of it. It's for the old people, and it's for the young people. And as I'll show you here, we recruit young firefighters as well. Good friends of West Conshohocken. Okay. Bobby Rocket, his son. This is parade day, and everybody marched on parade day back in the day. Okay, you'll see it there. Coming down Union Avenue, Union Hill, whatever. Okay. Former Mayor Mike Leonard, Archie Tarr, a few others. Mike Leonard was a good mayor to the community. And again, the volunteers here are second to none. Everybody gets involved in something. Some good old boys at the bar downstairs at the fire company. I think they were on a 2-beer limit. It's not like they got drunk. I was asking about this place earlier, Bell's Woods. This was a very popular spot for picnics back in the day. Boy Scouts would go up there and camp overnight. Events, church events would be held there. It was just a great spot in the community. Going back to Bullock's Woolen Mills, something people aren't aware of. World War I, World War II, and even parts of the Civil War. Okay, uniforms for the military, for the United States government, 90% of them were made at Bullock's Mills in West Conshohocken. When you saw soldiers in France and Germany, they're wearing a uniform that was made in West Conshohocken. Okay, and I consider that a pretty high honor for a small borough to have provided them uniforms for our military over the years. Again, the woolen mills when they were in full speed ahead there. Final years of the woolen mills down in West Conshohocken, and the demolition of the woolen mills. I could talk 2.5, 3 hours on athletes coming out of West Conshohocken. Certainly, Roy Whitey Ellum was one of them. He played for the Cincinnati Reds and Pittsburgh Pirates at the professional level. He was also manager of some professional leagues down south where he was hailed as a hero, given cars and other things for winning championships down there. Roy was a really good guy. And let's finish this thing out. Talk about if you put money away in a Christmas club, as we did years ago. We would go every week and we would make a deposit in a Christmas club. If you can read this, if you can't, but if you went every week to the First National Bank of Conshohocken and put 25 cents in your Christmas club, you'd have $12.50 by the end of the year to do your Christmas shopping. It was a wonderful thing. If you went to 50 cents, if you could afford it, you actually had like 25 bucks to Christmas shop with, and so on. So it was a pretty unique process that we had all them years ago. And as spring arises, and spring is right around the corner, for the guys in the room, I wanted to show off some of the sexy babes of days going by. These are bathing suits over the years, from 1900 or 1890, 1910, I think, 1930s and 40s, and this is how women dressed. I just read a thing earlier today that while you could have a bathing suit on the beach, in Atlantic City, you were not permitted to wear your bathing suit on the boardwalk. You would be escorted by a police officer off them boards for wearing a bathing suit on the boardwalk. So we're going to go ahead and leave you with this view. I wish I had more time, and maybe we'll do it some other time, although I rarely give these shows as I stated, but we're going to wrap it up with that, and if we can get them lights back on, I just have one or two more things to cover in the front of the room. Thank you, guys. Thank you. It's hard to get a mix showing the history and getting a few laughs with these shows, but I hope everybody enjoyed some or part of that program. I want to just give a quick thing here to a shout out. Jimmy McTammy's sitting here somewhere. I need you to come up front here, Jimmy. Come on up here. Get up here. And I need one other guy up here. I need Lee Slater up here. Lee, come on up here. I want to see you for a minute. How you doing, brother?
All right, good, man. Good.
Me and Jimmy go back a ways.
Good old WC boys.
Some time ago, I framed something that was a very appropriate piece, Lee. And if you'll take that and tell us what it is and what you're doing with it.
Jim, I found this in my house maybe a year ago. I don't know how it got there. It's a vintage, authentic West Country Raiders t-shirt. Probably 60 years old, if I had to guess. And I thought of you, and you are the ambassador. You promote and preserve the memories of the West Country Raiders more than anybody in the town. And I just thought it would be a nice thing, a nice token that you would have this. You could hang it in your home, put it in your new museum when you get it. And that is for you, my friend.
Thank you, man.
You good?
Thanks, Rob. Thank you, John.
Welcome, brother. So listen, guys, I really, truly enjoyed being here. I love the death out of West Conshohocken. I love the death out of the unity, the grit of this town. And to the younger people, it is a gritty town. And in my eyes and in my heart, it'll always be a gritty town. And that's the makeup of West Conshohocken. So I would love to see you stay strong for another 150 years. But more than anything, we should all be thankful that we're able to attend these types of events. And I know they have other events coming up during the year, and it'd be nice if you could come out and support them events. And I think right now, although the council is constantly a new council, they have found a way to blend in with some of the older residents. But more than that, they're trying to upgrade the town and rise up above with what they're doing and make it a better town for you. People want to live in West Conshohocken nowadays, okay? Nobody, back in my day, it was like people settled for West Conshohocken, okay? I came out of Philadelphia, born in Kensington, and moved to Upper Merion. And when I got married, of course I was going to live in a nice single home with a pool in Upper Merion. The problem is I didn't have any money, so I said, all right, I'll go to Bridgeport, and that didn't work out. I didn't have no money. And I went to Swedesburg, and I finally came to Conshohocken, where in 1972, you could buy a house on Hector Street for $4,000 if it had a dirt basement floor. Or you could spend $6,000 and have a concrete floor in that basement. That's what they were selling. And you kind of had to settle for Conshohocken. And you had to settle for West Conshohocken. And now West Conshohocken is suffering the same thing we are, where a row home on 4th Avenue just went for $459,000. Townhouse, no rooms. And West Conshohocken is suffering the same fate, where you're saying,